Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining the webinar today. We have, there's a few more people coming on board, and so we'll get started here shortly. This is our first in a series of webinars, and we hope that it provides and answers a lot of questions for you, and hopefully gives the opportunity for you to think up a few new questions you'd like to ask later on. And feel free to ask those questions and type them in at any time, and we'll make sure to get to you, get back to you and answer all those questions. I'd like to introduce James Allen. James is with Pegasus Capital Management, and he will be giving the webinar today. Thanks, James.
Thank you, Vince. Thank you, Vince. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. We appreciate you taking the time out of your day to sit in on this call and to hopefully get some of your questions answered with regards to planning for your financial future. We're going to talk about mainly that end goal at the end of the road, which is retirement, and then we're going to start that conversation by talking about what we need to accomplish first, which is cash management and budgeting, which is extremely vital first step in terms of planning for that goal down the road, which is retirement. So I appreciate you guys all taking the time today to join us. I hope this webinar is useful and topical as we all plan for our financial futures. I'll provide my contact info at the end just in case there are some questions that we are not able to get to, or if you feel like your question is personal or individual and you'd rather not have that discussed in front of everybody else, be more than happy to take that offline with you and chat about whatever your questions might be. So as I mentioned, the first step in financial planning for your future is budgeting. There are many different financial responsibilities that we've all got on our plates, especially if you have a family. I mean, that could range from a mortgage to car loans to saving for your kids' education down the road. The topics are honestly endless, and they all seem to pile up on us over the period of time. And you know, it's just a thing where if I can get all my ducks in a row initially and have a plan, I'm going to be in a better place. And I'm going to be able to execute on that plan and attain that goal down the road of hopefully being able to stop working someday, to enjoy the rest of my life and not have to work. If I want to work at that point, that's great, but the goal is to work only if you want to and not because you have to. And the first step in doing that is setting a plan now and budgeting for that goal down the road. You know, I mentioned those different financial responsibilities, or maybe they even feel like financial burdens, but I like to compare them to loading boxes onto a cart. You know, maybe one of those boxes is credit card debt, or you have a mortgage, or you've got a car loan, or you're taking care of your elderly parents. What happens if you do not have good planning is those boxes can weigh you down and you have one of these situations happen. This is someone who was woefully unprepared and quite literally unbalanced. This is not what we want to see when we're talking about managing all those different responsibilities. We want to make sure that we know what they are and we have them accounted for. With the proper planning, it is possible to manage all those different burdens, those different financial responsibilities that you and your family have. And so hopefully you wind up with a situation like this, where you are able to take on those different things that you need to take care of, and you're able to manage them and also set money aside for retirement one day. So part of budgeting, what it really boils down to initially is cash management. What are your priorities? So where should you be spending your dollars versus where did they actually go? You know, that sounds like a common sense question, but you'd be surprised at the number of folks who think they know where their money is going, and then they look back at their bank statement from the previous month and they are shocked at how much they spent going out to dinner, or how much they spent shopping, or how much they spent on just frivolous things. Knowing your priorities and knowing exactly where your dollars are going and where they should be going is vitally important. Pay yourself first. This is the most important step in saving for retirement. Making sure you're setting aside money now, whether that's through a retirement plan through your work, a 401k, 403b, pension plan, or if you don't have access to a retirement plan through work, you can set up an IRA or a Roth IRA. IRA stands for Individual Retirement Account. But if you are setting money aside now, basically giving yourself a head start, that is the best thing you could possibly do in terms of setting yourself up for success down the road. Have a budget. How much needs to go into your checking account? What are your recurring monthly payments that you need to have accessible right away? How much can you then put into savings? If you have anything extra, how much can I put into savings after that point? The next one's a big one, and it is honestly something that most Americans are faced with, and that is short-term debt, especially credit card debt. It is a truth that if you use credit cards, you will spend more money. If you do not have a credit card and all you have access to is your bank account, and all that you're able to pay for is what you have in your bank account, you are just not going to spend as much money as if you were granted a line of credit. So that's something to consider. Paying off that short-term debt, or at least keeping it manageable, is extremely important. Building an emergency fund. This is something that many folks do not do, and they get themselves into trouble by not having access to cash for those emergencies. Whether that's a car wreck and you've got a deductible that's really high and you have to pay out of pocket, or health care costs, etc. The list of possible emergencies is extremely large, and they're different for each person. So knowing that you have a chunk of money set aside to take care of any emergency that might arise in the future is essential. Use your savings account to do that. You've got your monthly expenses figured out, and you're using your checking account for that. Then use your savings account to build up your emergency fund. They say that anywhere from 3 to 6 months living expenses are what we should have in our emergency fund. I personally like to be as conservative as possible, because it's not always the case where we just have one emergency per month. Maybe a couple of things happen at once, and you need to make sure that you have access to cash to take care of those right away. Know what your target dollar amount is. Figuring out what those potential situations might be down the road is important. And so if you know that and you're able to figure out, well, what's my monthly income? How much do I really need to set aside in my emergency fund? And make that a target. Try to build up your savings account over a period of time so that at some point in time, maybe it's a year down the road or 2 years down the road, you've got a chunk of money that's sitting there and ready to use. Visualize your checking account as a bucket, and not just a bucket, but a bucket with a bunch of holes poked in the bottom of it, because that's honestly how most of us feel about our checking account. Every time we get a paycheck, every 2 weeks, we're putting money into that bucket, and then we turn around and we look back at our checking account a month later, and we're shocked at where all the money has trickled out and gone to. Visualize it as a bucket and try your best to stop the leaks, and you can do that by budgeting appropriately. Living within your means, I think, is the most important thing in this entire conversation, and that will really solve a lot of these issues that most Americans are faced with today, especially when it comes to credit card debt. Living within your means sounds simple enough, but it's something that Americans struggle with. If you don't have the money ready to buy that new truck, you probably shouldn't be buying that new truck. It's the old axiom, you've got caviar taste on a tuna fish budget. Knowing what your means are and staying within those means is crucial. And lastly, visualize no payments. No payments means no debt. No debt and no payments means more money in my pocket. Those who understand interest earn it. Those who do not pay it. So those who understand interest, who have a budget, who have a plan, have got money in their checking account to take care of those monthly expenditures, have got a savings account built up to take care of any emergencies that might come down the road, and then have extra money to set aside to start paying themselves first for retirement one day. whether that's an IRA, a retirement plan, or a stock brokerage account, so they can start saving up more money and taking that and investing it. Those are the folks who understand interest and earn it. The folks who do not, who get behind their budget and start living outside of their means, are the ones who wind up paying the interest. They are the ones who are saddled with credit card debt. So knowing where your money is going and planning appropriately is critical. So we've got a budget figured out. You know, we sat down, we crunched the numbers, we figured out how much is my mortgage, how much is my rent, what is our typical food expenditure from month to month, and okay, I've got my budget figured out. Now I've got maybe a little bit extra that I could put into saving for retirement. The retirement is the end goal for all of us. You know, that is the light at the end of the tunnel. You know, whether you want to continue working or not, it's having the ability to stop working when you want to so you can enjoy your life, spend time with your family, with your grandkids, play golf whenever you want to, not set the alarm clock before you go to bed at night. That's the end goal. You know, it's what we're all working towards. But there are many, many folks who are struggling on that path. There are a couple stats that are honestly very concerning when it comes to Americans and how they're doing with saving for retirement. The first stat, nearly 1 in 3 working Americans are unable to project when they will be able to retire. So if they're asked the question, when will you retire? The answer is, I have no idea. I don't know if I can retire at 65 or 66 or when I would like to retire because I don't have a plan in place. 47% of Americans currently between the ages of 56 and 62 would run out of the funds necessary to pay for basic retirement expenditures if they retired at age 65. Now, 65, that's an age that most of us are used to hearing when it comes to retirement age. You know, Social Security comes into the conversation, Medicare comes into the conversation. So 65 has been held out as the quote-unquote retirement age for most Americans. But look at the number of Americans who say they'd run out of money if that was their date at which they were going to retire. That's an issue. That's very concerning. The last stat is probably the most concerning and shocking. 61% of Americans questioned between the ages of 44 and 75 admit that they fear the prospect of depleting their accumulated assets during retirement more than they fear death itself. That is absolutely shocking, that their fear of outliving their assets in retirement is greater than the fear of death itself. And it's a large number of people. You know, those are the folks who did not start early, who did not budget appropriately, and are fearful of the fact that they might run out of money in retirement. So what are they going to do? They have to save more now, they have to spend less in retirement, or they need to work longer. Those are the 3 options. If you don't want to have to do any of those 3 things, then budgeting right now and planning ahead is the answer. Those 61% of Americans are the people who are in this situation. They're the ones who have gotten in over their heads on credit card debt. You know, they're not doing a good job of saving for retirement because their cash flow is going to servicing these debts that are oftentimes high interest rates. So planning for retirement, what is important? We need to identify our goals. And the first goal, and this is something that a lot of folks don't do until they start approaching retirement, is picturing what it actually looks like to you. You know, what is your lifestyle going to be in retirement? Are you somebody who likes to travel? Are you somebody who wants to travel internationally or go on a cruise once a year? Or do you want to, you know, just maintain your current lifestyle? Maybe go play golf or go fishing whenever you want to. Maybe you think, hey, I might be pretty bored in retirement. I think I might just want to pull back on the hours that I work each week, but maybe work part-time. Get a part-time job doing something that I enjoy doing. Working part-time, by the way, is the best way to fund your retirement. The best way to retire is to not completely retire because you've got the cash flow again. But picturing what your lifestyle is going to look like in retirement is really key. in this conversation, because then it's going to lead to what it will cost. At that point, you're going to be able to figure out, well, am I going on a trip or two each year in retirement? Where am I going? How much is that going to cost? That's an important question. How much do you need to save now in order to build up a chunk of money that you can live off of in retirement to pay for those different things that you want to do? Basically, what's your number? And there's a commercial out there, I think it's ING, and they've got those people walking around with that big orange number, and they've got it slung over their shoulders, or they're carrying it around, and it's always a really big number. But what that's saying is, do you know how much your retirement is going to cost you? And do you have the ability now to prepare for how much it will cost you? Start planning ahead now. Start socking away as much money as you can now. You can take it and you can invest it and grow it, but the engine behind all of this is your saving now. Depletion versus retention. This is a phrase that a lot of folks are unfamiliar with, but I'll touch on it in a bit. But it basically means, are you digging into your retirement accounts too much in retirement, where you are depleting the amount of money you have saved at too fast of a rate? Knowing what your depletion versus retention amount is, basically how much can I take out of my retirement accounts during retirement without depleting the pile of money that I have saved up. And then lastly, updating your 401k or your IRA or your 403b contribution amount annually. I like to call it the +1 strategy. Let's just say, I have access to a 401k through work or a 403b, and I'm participating at 4%. That's great, and that's a good start, but it's not enough to fund my entire retirement. I need to start saving a little bit more. So what should I do? Well, I can't afford to go from 4% to 10% because that's too big of a chunk out of my paycheck to be able to handle. So instead, what I will do is I will bump it from 4% to 5%, and on a paycheck basis, that's not a huge change. I can stomach that. I can do a 1% increase. But then I'll wait 1 year. I'll get used to that new savings rate. And then a year later, I will make a point to go in and bump it up by 1% again. So I'll go from 4 to 5 and then 5 to 6. And each year, I will do that. And then I'll go from 6 to 7. The entire time, I'm just making small gradual increases rather than straining myself, straining my budget. And hopefully along the way, I've gotten a raise, so that percentage that's going into my IRA or into my 401k is growing. And after a while, I'm at a really nice savings rate, and I don't remember it hurting too badly along the way. So making sure I stick to a +1 strategy and at least growing it a little bit each year is vitally important. So where's your retirement income going to come from? We've talked a lot about saving now, participating in any employer-sponsored plan that I have available to me, using an IRA if I don't have that available to me. But the other side of the coin is Social Security. How much is that going to fund me in retirement? Will that cover my expenses? For most people, the answer is no. It's not going to. It will help, but it's not going to cover all of them. So saving now and making sure I've got access to other funds besides my Social Security is important. There's a great website to go to, and everybody can do this. It does not matter what your age is, but if you want to see, based on how much you've been paying into the system, what you can expect to receive in monthly benefits from Social Security, that website right there, ssa.gov, is a great tool. That'll help you plan out and determine at which age that I retire, how much can I expect to get from the government. Most folks say, okay, I need to wait until I'm my full retirement age to file for Social Security. Well, the conversation's different for everybody. Some folks need money desperately as soon as possible. So maybe they're candidates for filing as early as possible, which is age 62. Maybe some folks have done a really good job saving for retirement, and they've got a big source of funds elsewhere where they do not need to tap into Social Security until, a little bit later. Basically, the longer you wait, the more your monthly benefits are going to grow. And you can see it when you go to the website. You can actually run a calculator that tells you, based on your own personal payments into the system, what is the best age at which I should file. Is it full retirement age, which for most folks is anywhere between 65 and 66 and a half, or if I wait until I'm 67, 68, 69, 70, is that benefit going to increase enough for me to be enticed into waiting to file later? Some common misconceptions, and we hear these a lot. And the number one misconception I hear is, I need $1 million to retire. $1 million is my number. Well, why is it your number? Well, because it sounds like a lot. It depends entirely on what your lifestyle is going to be in retirement. It might be your number if you're planning on traveling quite a bit. It might be your number. It actually might be a bigger number than that. But also, it might not be that big. If you're just planning on maintaining your current lifestyle, not living outside of your means, and you're one of those folks who just wants to keep going the way I was, and maybe I even want to work part-time, your number might not necessarily be $1 million, but it's different for everybody. It depends entirely on how much you plan on spending in retirement. Another misconception is that I must quit at a certain age, whether that's 59 and a half, 62, 65. These numbers kind of stick in our minds because we've heard them tied to different things. 65 is a number that's tied to not only Social Security but also to Medicare. Or 62, that's the earliest I can file for Social Security. So if I can start getting paid by the government, maybe I can stop working at that point. Or 59 and a half, that's the age at which the tax penalty goes away from drawing from my different retirement accounts too early. That's not the question you need to ask. Which age should I be retiring at? It's at what point will I have enough money saved up to be able to last me throughout retirement. Another thing we hear a lot is, my friend retired so I can too. Keeping up with the Joneses. I want to make sure that if Bob's retired and going out and playing golf on a Tuesday at 10:30 a.m., I can do that too. Well, if you can't afford to do it, you probably shouldn't be doing it. The flip side of that coin is, my friends have not retired yet, so I shouldn't either. Maybe I feel guilty for being the one guy who's just doing whatever he wants with his Tuesday afternoon. Again, it comes back to, what are your expenditures in retirement, and can you afford them, and can you afford to stop working at that point? The last misconception, and this is an important one because Americans are living longer and longer, is, I won't live to age 85, or I won't live to age X because my parents passed away at age 75. So I don't really need to plan to age 85 because I don't think I'm going to make it that far. Well, what if you do? What if you do end up living that long and you then outlive your assets because you only planned to a certain age? Just making sure you have yourself covered. And wouldn't that be a nice problem to have, though? Living 10 years longer than you thought? But making sure you can pay for that, boy, wouldn't that be nice? Some common errors to avoid. Obviously, the first one, we've been talking about it, living outside of your means. Spending more than you think, not really minding your checking account or knowing where your money is going. Well, I think I went through the McDonald's drive-thru once or twice last week. Well, no, it was 4 times. Not budgeting ahead of time. We have a certain budget set for making dinners every night, and I don't know, maybe we'll do steak one night or chicken another night. I'm not really sure. And that number is always bigger than what we think. A big one, not budgeting for health care and long-term care costs, especially the longer that we live. Americans are starting to live longer and longer, but the amount of health care costs is growing as well. And folks are needing access to health care, and they're needing it for a longer period of time because they're living longer. We're living longer, but we're not necessarily living healthier. So knowing that I'm covered in that regard, vitally important. Having to go to the hospital for an extended period of time, if I'm paying out of pocket, we all know how much health care costs. The answer is a lot. So if I'm paying out of pocket versus if I have prepared and maybe purchased a long-term care insurance policy ahead of time, there's a big difference there in how much money I have left over to do other stuff. Another big one is taking too much risk with my investments when it's unnecessary. Am I 62 years old and looking at retiring in 2 or 3 or 4 years and still invested in 100% stocks or something that's very aggressive? That's a red flag. Because what if we have another 2008 financial crisis happen a year or 2 years before you retire? Well, you're not going to be able to make up for that poor investment performance in the markets in enough time to retire on time. It's going to force you to work longer. And that's unfortunately exactly what happened in 2008. We were on such a high from the markets being so good for so long that a lot of folks who were near retirement were invested way too aggressively. And when the market took a turn for the worse, they were hurt more than they should have been. You know, they should have probably pulled back on the risk level and not have been so aggressive and so much in stocks. Knowing what your risk level is with your 401k, with your IRA, and with your brokerage account investments, very, very important, especially as you start to approach retirement and pulling back on that risk level. Another one is taking Social Security too early. And so I talked about those different ages, 62, 65, 70. What is the right age for me? Well, the answer for everyone, no matter who they are and what their situation is your benefits are going to be larger monthly the longer you wait. So if I file at age 62, I'm not going to get as much monthly as I would if I waited till I was 66 or even if I waited till I was 70. So knowing how much I can expect to get from the government at the various ages at which I can file, very important. And then another error is putting too much money into bank accounts, checking accounts, or CDs, or money market because of the way that current interest rates are today. This conversation would be very different if it was 1984, back when interest rates were much higher. You know, I could have afforded, in 1984, I could have been as conservative as I wanted to. I could have bought a bunch of CDs, I could have been in money market accounts, because the interest rates were paying me enough to grow those investments. Today, the conversation is different. Interest rates are at an all-time low. I am not paid nearly as well to be conservative as I would have been when interest rates were higher. So knowing where my money is and where it's invested and how much interest it is paying is something I need to be mindful of. How much will I spend in retirement, and where will those expenses go? This is something that might be surprising to most folks because most folks assume that recreation is the #1 expense in retirement. Well, I'm going to have so much time on my hands that I will be doing a lot more fishing or a lot more traveling or a lot more golf, etc. That's going to be my biggest expense. It's not. The biggest expense, and it is growing, it is becoming a larger and larger piece of this pie, is healthcare. Knowing what my expenses will be in retirement and planning ahead. They say that 65 to 85% of your current income is what you're going to need to maintain your lifestyle in retirement. I like to be conservative and shoot for closer to 85%. Making sure that I have myself covered. Why is that number not 100% though? Why don't I need the same amount? Well, the answer is, as I'm approaching retirement, hopefully if I've done a good job over time, and something that just naturally happens is a lot of those debts that I've been paying for, that I've been servicing over the course of my career, whether that's a mortgage, a car loan, trying to pay for kids' education, a lot of those financial burdens will drop off my plate. Hopefully. That's the goal. You know, my kids are grown up, they're out of the house. Man, they were a big chunk of my expenditure. But they're grown up, they're on their own now. They've moved out of the basement. Boy, this feels nice. I've got extra money to work with. That's why we don't need, on average, don't need as much in retirement as we do today, because our financial responsibilities tend to shrink, and that's a good thing. But where's my income coming from? So we talked about Social Security, and this is a stat from 2008. It has not changed very much, but how much are my various sources of income in retirement going to pay for all my stuff? As you can see, Social Security does not even pay for half of it. So what do I need to do? What do I need to take advantage of now so that I've got other sources of income in retirement? Part-time employment, you can see that's the second biggest source of income in retirement. Still working, whether that's going from 40 hours a week down to 20 or down to even 10. Keeping a little bit of cash flow coming back into your bank account is very, very helpful. And then the other two are savings, whether that's through a pension, retirement plan, or an IRA, or your own personal savings, whether that's a savings account or opening up a brokerage account so I can invest some of my savings. Getting back to that depletion versus retention conversation, here are the numbers you need to remember. Assuming I'm keeping my money, my savings invested in retirement, I'm not moving it all completely into cash. If I can withdraw 4% or less of the money I have saved, whether that's in my 401k, my IRA, etc., if I can withdraw 4% or less, the numbers work out to where that will not deplete the amount of money that's in my account. Because if it's still invested, it's still going to be growing. That's basically going to combat the withdrawal rate out of my account. So 4% or less, and I'm doing pretty good, and I'm not really seeing my balance shrink much at all. It's when I get to 5% and 6% of my overall balance where the investment performance is just not going to be enough to keep up with how much money I'm taking out of there. Knowing the retention amount and how much I can afford to take out without eating into my what we call the asset base, or the amount of money I have saved, versus depleting it over time. And knowing that difference is, again, of the utmost importance. So pre-retirement, we like to call this the pre-retirement red zone. What do I need to be thinking about? Obviously, retirement. Get an outline for what it's going to look like. How much do you need to save in order to retire? How much should I be saving right now? Where's my income going to be coming from? Am I filing for Social Security at 62, 66, waiting till 70 to maximize it as much as possible? Maximizing my current retirement plans. Do I have a 401k at work, and is there a company match? I need to know that so I can take advantage of all of my current retirement plans and all my benefits. Reducing and eliminating debt. Working off the high interest debt first, credit cards. Reducing that number and then focusing on the other debt, the mortgage, the car loans, etc. Getting a handle of that, important. Review my investment allocation. Assuming my money is not 100% in cash and that I actually want it to grow for me more than what I put in myself, I'm probably going to be invested somewhere. Knowing where that is, whether that's conservative, moderate, aggressive, just knowing what that is and reviewing it on a frequent basis is important. Insurance planning. I talked about long-term care already, and the fact that healthcare costs are rising and that they just seem to keep going up every single year. Knowing that I've got a handle on how much that might cost now, and planning ahead, maybe buying a long-term care insurance policy or buying life insurance policy just in case something happens to me before I get to retirement age. I want to make sure my family's taken care of. I want to make sure if my wife isn't working right now, or if my husband is not working right now because they're raising our children, are they taken care of? I don't want them to have to go to work if I can help it. Estate planning. Do I have a will in place? Do I have a power of attorney and a healthcare directive in place so that if something happens to me, I have already named somebody who can take care of my estate, who will basically guide my family through what will happen with all my different assets. And then tax planning. Knowing which sources, so Social Security, 401k, IRA, Roth IRA, brokerage account, savings account, knowing which of those sources is taxable in retirement versus non-taxable is another important thing to be mindful of. when you get Social Security or when you pull money out of a traditional IRA or a 401k, that's going to be taxable to you in retirement. It'll be part of your adjusted gross income. But a Roth IRA is not. It's not taxable. And that's just an example, but knowing which of these sources is taxable and which is not taxable so I don't have a giant tax burden in retirement is another thing I need to be mindful of. And then post-retirement, or what I say in retirement, again, tax planning, knowing which tax bracket you are in. You will most likely be in the lowest tax bracket because you do not have a job at that point. You're pulling money from Social Security or maybe from your retirement savings. But if you do have a part-time job, or if you're taking a lot of money out of these various sources, you need to know at which point you're going to be bumped up to the next tax bracket based on how much income you're taking from those various sources. Looking at those and basically considering them buckets and knowing that they're all separate buckets and they all have their own different rules and tax ramifications is a good visualization. So I've got my Roth IRA bucket, that's non-taxable. I've got my savings bucket, that's non-taxable. Checking, non-taxable. IRA, taxable. Knowing which ones are going to tax you and which ones will not is important as well. Social Security, I've talked about it multiple times, but when am I going to file? Is full retirement age the correct answer for me? Is it 66, or have I saved up enough money to draw off of so I can delay my filing of Social Security to bump up my monthly benefits? You know, waiting all the way until age 70, maybe that's the right strategy for me. When should my spouse file? That's an important one because, you know, every family unit, maybe you don't have a spouse who's working, maybe you got a spouse who is working. You know, do I make more money than my spouse? Are we close to each other in age? All these different conversations have a bearing on when you should file and when your spouse should file. And then ongoing monitoring. Knowing how much you've got in potential retirement income down the road versus retirement expenses down the road based on the lifestyle that you want to live, something that you always want to have in the forefront of your mind and you want to review at least annually. And then are my retirement accounts properly allocated? Am I getting closer to age 60, age 65, and mindful of how much money I have in the stock market? Am I too aggressive or am I okay? So what do I do now? Step one, organize. And this is the hardest thing for folks to do because it is fighting inertia. I just need to sit down and write out a plan. I need to find a checklist that will help me figure out all those different things I need to be doing so I can get on top of my budget and set a budget. Organization is the key to all this. If you are not organized, you're going to fail. If you are organized, you're going to be able to save a lot of money. You just have to set a plan and stick to it. Utilize all of your available sources, retirement plan through work, IRA, stocking money away when you can. Making sure your investments are allocated the right way, figuring out how much income you need in retirement, paying off debt or at least paying it down over time, and living within your means. Those are the most important things you can do. Just consider these my big steps that I need to take in order to get to that goal of retirement down the road. So I will leave the screen right here and turn it back over to Vince. I'm not sure if he accumulated any questions, but I'll let him take over from here. Jot down our phone number and maybe my email address if you do have a question that's not able to be answered today, or if you have more of a personal situation you'd like to talk to me about. I'd be more than happy to chat with anybody.
James, thank you very much. Great presentation. I certainly have a number of things to think about after watching it, and I hope everybody else does. I do have a couple questions here we have, and we'll let James answer them. We have Tim from Blue Springs asked, what is the maximum I can put in my IRA or Roth IRA, and how much can my wife put in?
Oh, great question. So I'm not sure how old Tim is, but let's say Tim's 48. If Tim is 48 and his wife is 48, he can do $5,500 a year, and his wife can do $5,500 a year. So they each can do that maximum. A lot of folks are confused. You know, if we're married filing jointly, what's our maximum? You have your own maximums no matter what. So if you've got your own maximum of $5,500 and your wife has her own maximum of $5,500. Let's say you guys are both 50. At 50, a catch-up contribution comes into play. Basically, the IRS is allowing you to put a little bit more in each year. So if you're 50 and older, you get to put in an additional $1,000 each. So instead of each of you being able to do $5,500, you can each do $6,500 a year.
Excellent, excellent. Have another one here. Susan from Independence. What should I focus on paying down first? My mortgage, my credit cards, or my car loan?
Great question. I always say paying down your highest interest debts first is the best way to go about it. And the reason is, if you just do the simple math and figure out how many dollars are going to service this debt or that debt, well, the ones with the higher interest, you're going to be paying more dollars than you need to service those debts. So paying off your highest interest balances first is going to help out the most. So that will almost certainly be your credit cards. And then the thing to remember about mortgage payments is that mortgages not only usually have lower interest rates in general, especially lower than credit cards, but also in most cases my mortgage interest that I pay each year is deductible against my taxes. So there's a little bit of a benefit in continuing to pay my mortgage. So when I'm ranking the various debts that I need to pay down, Vince mentioned 3 debts. He included auto loans as well. I would say credit cards number 1, auto loans number 2, and mortgages number 3. But the best rule of thumb is just to look at your different interest rates you're paying, focus on the higher interest rates first.
Excellent. Thank you, James. I've got one more here, and we'll wrap up after this. I have money set aside to open an IRA, but I can't decide if I should open a traditional IRA or a Roth IRA. Which one is best for me?
So the conversation here revolves almost entirely around taxes. When am I going to be paying taxes on the money that I take out of these two sources? Traditional IRA, Roth IRA. It's basically giving me an option of when I want to pay taxes. And let me clear up a little confusion that I hear a lot. The confusion revolves around, are Roth IRAs and traditional IRAs, are they different savings vehicles? The answer is technically yes, because if you have both of them, they're going to show up as different accounts. But the only difference between the two of them is they are figuring out, is this bucket of money going to be taxable in retirement or not? And so what you need to remember, and I'll start with traditional IRA, and it's basically, when am I going to get my tax benefit? With the traditional IRA, I'm getting my tax benefit now. As I contribute to my traditional IRA each year, my contributions are tax deductible. So they might lower your taxable income each year. However, when you withdraw your funds from your traditional IRA in retirement, that amount is going to be taxable to you. So let's just say you've got, at the end of the road, you got $50,000 in a traditional IRA. If you pull $1,000 out of that one year, that $1,000 is going to be included in your adjusted gross income, and you're going to have to pay taxes on it. The benefit being now, I get to lower my taxable income by putting money into a traditional IRA. So I'm getting my tax benefit now, and I'm basically shifting my tax burden down the road. Roth IRA is just the complete opposite. I'm not getting any type of tax deduction as I put money into it this year. So I'm losing out on that benefit, but down the road I get a huge benefit by participating in a Roth IRA. So assuming I reach the age 59 and a half, and I've kept my money in that Roth IRA for 5 years or more, not only are my withdrawals from the Roth IRA tax-free, but all the investment growth I saw over the course of that entire time is also tax-free. And that is something that a lot of folks forget about. You've got the investment growth that's also taken care of in the Roth that is tax-free if you do a Roth. So it really comes down to personal preference. When do I want to get my tax benefit? Would I prefer to lower my taxable income now? Maybe I've just barely eclipsed the next tax bracket, and boy, I just went from the 18% bracket to the 25% bracket. I really love to get my taxable income down. I can utilize a traditional IRA and fund that up to $5,500 a year or $6,500 to lower my taxable income. So maybe that's beneficial to me. It's just really up to your personal preference, and this is where I get a lot of individual questions. So if you have questions about that or need some clarification, I'd be happy to chat with you offline.
James, thank you very much. You certainly gave a lot of info, and I'm sure there are plenty more questions coming in. And we encourage everyone to continue to send their questions in, and it will be answered. James will be happy to answer those. We want to make sure that everybody gets covered, and you're always welcome to reach out with the email addresses and phone number. And we want to thank everyone who took the time to listen in. You can always refer back to this webinar. It will be hosted on our website, and you can view it on demand. You can send it to someone else who may have missed it and want to see it. And as always, we sincerely appreciate you as members of the Greater Kansas City Public Safety Credit Union. Have a great day.